Canada didn't just build too many houses, it built an entire economy on top of them. And now, that economy is caving in. 17 cities, 52% collapse in sales volume in Toronto alone. $600 billion in household wealth. Gone. Not shrinking. Gone. And the Canadian Real Estate Association just downgraded its national forecast for the third time, projecting continued contraction through 2027. If you think this is a real estate story, you are already behind. This is a story about what happens when a country mistakes a bubble for a foundation, and then the bubble pops. Stay with me, because what comes next is the part the headlines are not telling you. I'm going to walk you through exactly how this happened, why it was always going to happen, and what it means for every Canadian whether you own a home or not. If you have been following what is happening to Canada's economy, the trade war, the talent exodus, the demographic collapse, drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from. Because this story is bigger than housing, and it starts 15 years ago. After the 2008 financial crisis, the Bank of Canada held interest rates below 2% for 12 consecutive years. 12 years of cheap money flooding into one place: real estate. Families stopped saving. They bought properties instead, not to live in, as retirement vehicles. Foreign investors, particularly from China and Hong Kong, poured billions into Vancouver and Toronto. And the federal government didn't just allow it. A housing minister stood in front of cameras in 2019 and called rising home prices a sign of economic strength. He was describing a bubble and labeling it prosperity. That single policy blindness cost a generation everything. At the same time, Canada was manufacturing a supply crisis through its own zoning laws. Ontario had some of the most restrictive building codes in North America. Single-family homes dominated neighborhoods where apartment buildings should have stood for decades. Between 2015 and 2022, Canada welcomed 2.4 million new residents, but built only 1.1 million housing units. The math was always broken. Nobody in power wanted to say it out loud. If any of this is making you angry, you should be angry. Share this video right now, because most people still don't understand why this is happening. Then the pandemic arrived and poured fuel on the fire. Remote work made geography irrelevant. Urban professionals fled to smaller cities and bid prices up by 30–40% in 18 months. Halifax jumped 37% in a year and a half. Government emergency payments put cash into millions of hands. Much of that cash went directly into down payments on homes that were already dangerously overpriced. The system was running so hot it had no room to breathe. And then the Bank of Canada did the only thing it could do. It raised rates. 7 times in 18 months. Mortgage rates crossed 5% for the first time since 2008. A homeowner with a $500,000 mortgage went from paying $2,000 a month to $3,400. $16,000 extra dollars a year that most families simply did not have. Here is what most people still do not understand. The interest rate hikes did not cause this crisis. They exposed it. Everything the rate hikes revealed had been building quietly for 15 years, while the government collected transfer taxes, the banks collected interest, and ordinary families believed their rising home values meant they were getting ahead. Sales collapsed first. Then inventory piled up. Then prices followed. Listings in Vancouver rose 41% year over year. Homes in Toronto sat on the market for 63 days. In 2021, that number was 12. 17 cities are now in negative equity territory. Homeowners who owe more on their mortgages than their homes are worth. They cannot sell without catastrophic losses. They cannot move for better jobs. They are financially frozen in place. And here is the layer of this story that almost no one is covering, and it may be the most consequential part of all. Over 68 million Canadians with university degrees moved to the United States in 2025 alone, the highest number since 1998. A software engineer in San Francisco earns $200,000 and can buy a home. That same engineer in Toronto earns $140,000 and cannot afford a 2-bedroom condo. The people living are not random. They are doctors, engineers, researchers, programmers, the exact people whose taxes fund the services everyone else depends on. Every departure shrinks the revenue available to fix the problem. The crisis is feeding itself. Canada's fertility rate now sits at 1.33 children per woman. Immigration targets were quietly cut by 30% in January 2026. Fewer births, fewer newcomers, more departures. The population math that funded Canada's entire social contract is unwinding simultaneously from three directions at once. Construction employment dropped 42,000 jobs in a single quarter. Ontario's land transfer tax revenue fell from $3.1 billion in 2022 to $1.8 billion by 2025. Over 82,000 new housing units across Ontario sit unsold. Another 60,000 are stalled mid-construction. The developers built assuming the growth would continue. It didn't. Prime Minister Carney announced a plan to build 3.87 million homes by 2031. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says the country needs 5.8 million new units by 2030 just to restore affordability to 2004 levels. The gap between what the government announced and what is actually needed is nearly 2 million homes. The plan does not solve the problem. It manages the optics of the problem. And the Bank of Canada sits trapped in an impossible position. Cutting rates might stabilize housing, but risks reigniting inflation. Holding rates accelerates the crash. Both objectives are legitimate. Both cannot be achieved at once. And ordinary Canadians are paying for the contradiction with their savings, their stability, and their futures. Canada survived the 2008 American housing crash and turned that survival into a national identity. We are different. Our banks are smarter. Our market is sound. That story lasted 16 years. It is finished now. But here is where Canada's situation is arguably worse than America's in 2008. When the American housing market collapsed, household wealth was spread across equities, real estate, pension funds, and other assets. Diversification absorbed part of the blow. In Canada, 83% of household wealth sits in real estate. There is no offset, no shock absorber. When housing falls, everything falls, all at once. What is actually happening here is not a housing crisis. It is the unmasking of an economic model that was never built to last. For 15 years, Canada ran an economy where the primary engine of wealth was not productivity, not innovation, not rising wages. It was the price of an asset that everyone already owned going up. Forever. Families borrowed against that appreciation to fund their lives. Cities taxed it to fund their services. Developers built into it to fund their profits. The entire cycle had one requirement: prices must never stop rising. That is not an economy. That is a Ponzi structure wearing a flag. And like every structure built on that logic, it worked perfectly, right until it didn't. The generation under 40 has already absorbed the loss that the system was too afraid to acknowledge. Home ownership for Canadians aged 25 to 34 dropped from 52% in 2000 to 37% in 2024. They delayed marriage, they delayed children, they delayed every milestone because the price of entry into middle-class stability was set beyond their reach. And now, the same system that locked them out is collapsing anyway. Here is what we know for certain, updated daily. 17 Canadian cities have recorded double-digit housing price declines. Toronto lost 52% of its transaction volume. $600 billion in household wealth has been erased. 82,000 units sit unsold across Ontario. 68,000 educated Canadians left for the United States last year. The government's housing plan falls short by nearly 2 million units. The Bank of Canada is trapped. The fertility rate is 1.33. Immigration targets are down 30%. The model is not bending, it is broken. What we do not know is whether any government has the political courage to tell voters the truth. That housing cannot be both an affordable necessity and a perpetually appreciating investment at the same time. That someone must absorb the loss, and that every month the decision is delayed, the loss grows larger. A correction is a market finding its floor. What is happening in Canada right now is a country discovering that the floor was never there to begin with. No diversified economy underneath it. No safety net for the generation that was priced out. No plan that closes the actual gap. Just the slow exposure of everything that was supposed to be there and isn't. I want to hear directly from you. If you bought in 2021 or 2022, tell me what your situation looks like today. If you are renting and watching this unfold from the outside, tell me what it feels like. If you left Canada for economic reasons, tell me where you landed and whether it was worth it. The data tells one version of this story. Your lived experience tells another. I need both in the comment section below. If this gave you a clearer picture of what the headlines keep missing, hit the like button right now. One tap. That single action is what pushes this past the algorithm and in front of the people who need to understand what is happening. This crisis does not exist in isolation. It is connected to the trade war, the China pivot, the Alberta fracture, and the demographic collapse. And we are covering every chapter, every day. If you are not subscribed yet, now is the time, because the next piece of this story drops soon, and you will not want to come in halfway through.